All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 10th of October, 2006, approximately 12:40 p.m. Interviewer is Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My name is Martin S. Belefant. I was born in New York City, March 14th, 1925.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
At the time I entered service, I was just 18. I had already completed 2 years of college. Up until that point, I was on an accelerated program. I completed high school in 3 years, and even in college I was taking advanced courses, and the Army put a quick end to that program.
Okay, where were you attending college?
I was attending college at City College in New York City. I was majoring in business and public accounting, and was drafted shortly after my 18th birthday, I think.
Okay.
They allowed me to complete the semester, and immediately after that ended up being drafted.
Okay, so you answered my next question about how you got into the service.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, I was at home with my mother, father, and brother, and the news came over the radio.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you remember your reaction or your family's reaction to that?
Yes, very much so. We were all aware of the fact that both I and my brother would probably end up in the conflict. It was not unexpected. We were all aware of what was going on in the world, so that when the attack came, that put closure to it, and it was a very unhappy circumstance, learning of...
Was your brother older or younger?
Younger brother.
Did he end up in the service?
Yes, but fortunately for him, he was drafted toward the very end of the conflict and served a short time, not in combat, in this country, and was released, I think, after 6 months of service.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic training?
Trying to recall where we ended up in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
like everyone else. Fort Hood, what that was called Camp Hood.
Mm-hmm.
It's now
Fort Hood, yes.
Hood.
All right. How long was your basic?
I completed basic, I think it was 13 weeks, but shortly thereafter I became aware of this program called Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP,
Mm-hmm.
and I was always a good student in school, and the Army gave us an intelligence test of some sort. I scored very highly in that, and was assigned to this ASTP program. So shortly after basic, I ended up in this program. The Army decided I should become an engineer, which was fine with me. Up until that point, I had no interest in engineering. But the Army has its own way of choosing who does what. So if they wanted me to be an engineer, I'd become an engineer. And as I say, I was assigned to this program.
Okay, and now how long were you in that program?
Until it ended, which wasn't, it was I think February of the next year. The program was disbanded, and practically all of us ended up as riflemen in some infantry company.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you assigned to the 99th Division
Yes, yes.
while you were still in the States?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
the 99th Division was being reformed at that time. All it had was non-com and officers and very few enlisted men. And the ranks were filled with ASTP members, which caused a lot of difficulty with the officers and the non-coms, because the ASTP people were coming in as privates, which was a requirement. You couldn't come in any other rank. And the officers and non-coms were basically regular army. The problem with the non-coms, they resented the fact that these college boys were coming in, and the officers resented a little because the IQ of the privates was much higher than the officers. In order to become an officer, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think the AGCT requirement for an officer was 125, and the average IQ of these new privates was like 150. So it wasn't until we really got into combat that everyone realized we were all in the same boat, and we better get along with each other. But up until that time, there was some hostility, nothing serious, but it was fairly obvious that the non-coms didn't feel comfortable with the situation. The officers were a little better about it, but as I say, it was a little uncomfortable for a while.
Okay. How long did you train in the United States before you went overseas?
Well, as I said, when the ASDP folded, we went into the 99th, and we had another period of similar to basic. The division as a unit went through like basic training all over again. And it was sometime, I think, in September of 44 that we went overseas. But from, I think, February or March of 44, when the ASTP folded, until September, we trained in Texas, if that's considered part of the United States, I don't know.
Okay. I take it you didn't like Texas then?
No. The temperature, and when we went down there, whether it was the first time or later on, was usually in the summer, it could be over 100, and going on 25-mile hikes with a full field pack and a rifle, that kind of temperature wasn't that pleasant, doing any physical activity. Fortunately, we were all 18, 19 years old, so we took it, but it was not very pleasant.
Now you were assigned an M1 then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When you went overseas, did you go on a convoy or single ship?
Yes, no, it was a convoy. It was a gigantic convoy. No matter which way you looked, there were ships.
Now you went overseas in September of 44. Did you go right to Europe or mainland?
Yes,
or
we went to England.
England first? Okay.
We stayed there for about a month.
And where did you go onto the continent?
We landed at Le Havre, but at that point it was completely destroyed. We couldn't actually land at a pier. We actually landed on LCIs. We had to get off the ship that took us across on the Jacob's ladders, which is another very strange experience, with a full field pack and a rifle going over on a ladder, a rope ladder. When you look down, if you happen to miss, you go right into the ocean, not into this LCI. But that's how we went onto these LCIs, and the LCI landed at the harbor. There was no opposition, there was no question of any combat.
What were your impressions when you went in and saw the destruction?
I was very surprised because I had not that I had done any traveling before I went into the Army, but I knew the harbor was a major port, and I expected to anticipated landing at a dock and walking off. But having to go ashore on an LCI was an experience. And actually, once we landed, we started moving by truck to Germany and actually through Belgium. But it was a great experience seeing the devastation. Not only with the people in the houses, but what still sticks in my mind is the cows, dead cows that had been shot up and were just left lying there. Nobody had cleaned it up.
Okay. Now, where were you assigned in Belgium, and when did you arrive there approximately?
Well, when I first was assigned to the 99th Division, I was assigned to the 395th Regiment. I was assigned to Company I. I was assigned to the first squad. I don't remember, it was the 3rd platoon or the 1st platoon. And I was assigned to a sergeant, and I stayed with that particular unit all the time until my ultimate capture, which made it as pleasant as could be for that type of service, because I've spoken to many replacements, and they've told me that it was a very unhappy feeling going into a brand new unit, knowing no one, and being assigned to do something and couldn't even talk to the guy that was next to them. I would say I was with a unit all the time, the same unit from the day I was assigned to the 99th Division.
Did you develop any close friendships? You must have.
Yes. I knew all the time that none of these relationships were long-term, because very few of the people that I was with were actually from New York City or large cities, and that's where I grew up. I met people there who were my age, 18 years old, 19 years old, who were married and had children, which was a shock to me. When I went into the Army at 18, I didn't even know a girl. And here were people that had established families, and many of the people there had entirely different backgrounds. Even though they were all college students or high school graduates with intentions of going to college, they came from families with urban backgrounds, rural backgrounds, not city backgrounds. I mean, they talked about things that, like roofs and cleaning gutters, and that's what they talked about. And I mean, one of the jokes I remember, even on the train trip down to Texas, we passed a field of some crop, and it had all been packed up in bags. And knowing my background, they said to me, "Look, that's what onions look like." I said, yeah, but they're in packs, in sacks. I didn't realize they grew in sacks. I thought they grew in the field.
Mhm.
But this is the kind of band that you know, they're all entirely different backgrounds than mine.
Okay. How would you rate your officers?
Mostly competent, mostly competent. We did have some 30-day, 90-day wonders, I guess, we call them then. And they had to learn just as we had to learn. But some of the regular Army officers were very competent. They knew what their job was, and they did their job. And we knew what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to give us a hard time.
Now, when was the first time you were under combat, in combat?
Well, that was probably in November or December. But it was mostly patrol activity. The sector that we were assigned to was supposed to be a quiet area. We were spread out. Spread out to the extent that everyone knew this is not the right way to defend an area. As a private, as a rifleman in the infantry, naturally I was as far front as you could be. I could see the pillbox across the ravine, and I could see the German soldiers coming out, going in. They could see us going out, going in. The rumor was that they all had girlfriends behind us, and at night they would go meet their girlfriends, in the morning go back to their pillbox. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I couldn't see the unit on my right, and I couldn't see the unit on my left, so there was plenty of space in between. And because of the weather, it was I think the coldest winter on record up to that point, we gravitated to the houses. After 1 or 2 nights of sleeping in the snow in a pillbox with no real activity going on, we sort of, as I say, gravitated to the farmhouses. They were all abandoned, all the civilians had left. So we were basically in the farmhouses along the line.
Now, I had talked to you before we started taping. How would you rate your equipment compared to that of the Germans?
Well, the weapons that the German infantry soldier had, at least at the time of the Bulge, was superior to ours. They were all equipped with automatic rifles, while the rifle we had was a semi-automatic. Every time you pulled the trigger, it shot. They would just pull the trigger and it kept on spraying bullets. So their rifle was superior to ours. The 88s was superior to our 75s, the artillery. I understand from talking to the tank people that the range of the cannon on the German tanks was greater than ours, so that an American tank had to get closer to be effective. Well, they could just stay off in the distance and knock off the tanks. So,
now, how about your winter gear?
well, their winter gear was better than ours. If you just looked at the German overcoat, it went down to their ankles. Ours, reached our knees. Now, as far as other things, the boots. We had basically normal high shoes, which was all right. The Army did have boots with straps further up. It didn't require leggings. Those things never got as far as the front lines. They were all, whenever we went to the rear area, we found all the rear area troops had those things, but we never got them. We were all issued 2 pairs of pants and 2 wool shirts, which we wore both pair at the same time because the weather was extremely cold. And even as far as camouflage, the German soldiers had, it looked like white sheets, but it was something white over them. We had the regular uniform, which could be seen at a distance. They could get much closer to us without us seeing them, and we could get to them.
Do you talk about the Battle of the Bulge that you were involved in?
Yes. The Battle of Bulge started on December 16th, 1944. I was captured December 16th, 1944. As I said, I was as far front as you could be. And at that time, I was in a farmhouse. There were 6 of us in the farmhouse. We were attacked on December 16th by what I thought was merely a German combat patrol of approximately 50 men. And it seemed to me that all 50 of them had automatic weapons of some sort. We only had 5 rifles, and we had 1 BAR, which is an automatic weapon. When we were attacked by this group, after a short while, the BAR man was wounded, which temporarily put us at a complete disadvantage. I was of the impression then, and still am today, that since it was early in the Bulge, their mission was to take prisoners, and not to kill all troops, because it seemed they went to great efforts not to completely, not to kill us all, which would have been very easy, because I say we were in a building and they were spread around outside with grenades, just the building that would have. But they asked us to surrender, and the BAR man, who fortunately spoke fluent German, which I didn't realize until that day, negotiated a surrender. He was had it.
How severely was he wounded?
He was shot either in the hip or the leg, or generally because he couldn't move, but it was not a life-threatening wound, which we didn't know at the time. But he negotiated with them in German for surrender, and we all surrendered. Of the 6 of us, 2 managed to escape, I guess. I don't know exactly how it happened, but there were three of us who helped the wounded soldier. We, carried him back with the German captors to the rear area. Another thing that impressed me is the German patrol had a medic right with them, and they offered some kind of treatment to this wounded GI.
Now, you told me before the Germans took two things from you. What were those two things?
Well, they very politely asked me if I had any cigarettes, and everyone carried cigarettes because they were currency. I mean, I didn't smoke, but we all used them as currency. So I gave him the pack of cigarettes, and he very politely took them and offered me one cigarette pack. But that was it. And a little later on, when I got to the first interrogation point, they took, we carried extra socks in our pockets. They took the extra socks at that point. Later on, they took more, but that was the first two things that were taken from me.
Now, what was the interrogation like?
Well, it's funny how things turn out to be blessings in disguise. When I got back to the first interrogation point, naturally I was interrogated by a German who spoke English perfectly, and like all German interrogators, they all had a cousin in Milwaukee, and they try to keep it on a non-belligerent level. And I think the first question he asked me, how long have you been in Germany? Because at that point we were actually we crossed the border. We weren't in Germany. How long have you been in Germany? I said, in Germany, I thought I was still in France. And he said, and I said, the fortunate thing was, I was a private in the infantry, and as far as the Germans concerned, that was like, one step above the Russians, If I'd been an officer or a non-com, I don't think they would have let me get away with such stupidity. But once I said, I thought I was still in France, they said, next case, and that was the end of the interrogation at that point. I'll tell you about some interrogations later on, which weren't quite so pleasant.
Okay, well, why don't you go along with your capture?
Well, one of the things that upset me most and worried me most and caused some moral dilemmas was interrogation at the official interrogations at German Stalag, German camps. We were moved a couple of times because as the lines got closer, they moved us from one to the other. So I was in several different camps. But one of the first questions that was asked in various different forms was, what's your religion? Sometimes it was asked privately, even individually, and other times when all the prisoners were all lined up, they say, all Jews step forward. And I am Jewish, although I do not practice that much. But, I say I was born Jewish, I am Jewish, I'll stay Jewish, I'll die Jewish. That's,
now, did it signify anything on your dog tag?
yes, I got rid of, that's another point. One of the first things I did, maybe the first thing I did when I was captured was throw away my dog tags, because they all had an H on it, which gave your religion away. But as I said, when I got to these camps, on I think at least two different occasions, two different camps, they say all Jews step forward, and I did not. And now 60 years later, 55 years later, I have met people that did step forward. They ended up in a concentration camp, not a prisoner of war camp. Their record of fatalities was very high. They were worked. This particular one, this friend of mine that I met, say, 55 years later, was working in a mine, 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, only because he stepped forward and admitted he was Jewish. Now, as I grew up, as I said, my name is Belefant, which signifies nothing. I've traveled all over the world, and I adjust the name to fit the circumstances. If I go to France, it becomes Belefant. If I go to Italy, it's Belefante. If I go to Spain, it's something similar. As a child, I was uncomfortable with the name because it's not an easy name, And I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to change that name. But after my experience in Germany, I'm not going to change that name because when the Germans interviewed me on several different occasions in several different camps, and they asked my religion, I became whatever was convenient at the time. I was a Baptist in one place, a Christian, a Catholic in another, and a Protestant someplace else. And one of the moral dilemmas I had is, should I have been a dead hero or what? But as I said, I've struggled with it, but if it would happen again, I would do the same thing all over again. For some reason, and I don't know why, right after I was captured, there were 4 of us. One of them was a non-com, one of them was wounded, and the other one was a private, just as I. But we also went to different camps, so there was no one there that could give me away, and I was happy that I was alone, which is sort of strange to say, because I certainly would have been more comfortable with others that knew me. We were all the United States Army, it wasn't that I was among enemies or anything, but one of the little secrets I always kept to myself was my religion.
So you were moved from one stalag to another?
Yes. We ended up, I think the first one I went to was Luckenwalde, which is just south of Berlin. But the Russians were on the move at that time. And as the Russian lines moved closer to us, they moved us, I think, twice after that to camps that were further west.
Now, what was the food like in the camps?
Practically non-existent. The normal ration was 2 slices of bread a day and a bowl of what they called soup. I understand it was supposed to be made with rutabagas, which I had never heard of at that point. And that was it. The soup was served at noontime, about around noontime. And as it happened, this is, I think, later on, the Army had, the Air Force had a 1,000-plane a day raid over Berlin, which was fairly close to the camp, so that whenever they had these raids, an air raid siren would go off, and we'd have to skip the meal because there'd be no meal that day. because of this air raid. But the maximum that we ever got to eat was one bowl of soup and two slices of bread. Everyone in the camp had malnutrition and malnutrition-related diseases.
Did you ever get any Red Cross packages?
Very few, and even when we did get them, they were split up like one for every 10 prisoners of war. It's intended one for one, but I imagine the Germans kept as much of it as they could.
Now, who were your guards? Were they older men or young boys?
Mostly older men. At that point, the one time I remember being guarded by, I thought was I was 18 to 19, and this fellow was younger, so he may have been 14 or 15. But he was assigned to take me from one interrogation point to someplace else. And I remember walking on the road for a couple of hours. And I kept on asking him, where are we going, and he wouldn't tell me. So there were trucks going by. I used the universal sign for hitchhiking with my thumb, and oddly enough, when the German trucks stopped, and I got onto the back of the truck, and he's on the ground looking up, and there was a big rifle, which was bigger than him, in his hand, and he couldn't get onto the truck. So he reached down, he gave me the rifle, and I helped him up into the truck, and he said, "Danke schön." I said, "You're welcome." But it's one of the funny things that happened in the wartime. I had the rifle, and he's guarding me.
Where did you end up in what final camp were you in?
I was in a camp in Altengraben, and even as something happened which I didn't understand at the time, and on reflection, it sort of makes sense. A German guard, I considered an old man. He'd been 30, maybe he was 35 years old, but to me he was an old man. And he took 30 of us, about 30 of us, American prisoners, and we started walking west. We left the camp, and he was just one guard. And each night we'd stop, and he'd ask permission from some local German, and we'd sleep in a barn.
How many of you were there approximately?
Just about 30, and just this one guard. And as far as food, whatever he could scrounge from the local people, he gave us, and he himself. And I think on the third or fourth day, we crossed the Elbe River. We were on the other side, on the west side of the Elbe River, sleeping in as usual, we were sleeping in a barn. And about dawn, he comes in, and again, in perfect English, never spoke English before that, he said, "You are free, your comrades are here." And we look out the barn door, and sure enough, there were American tanks rolling through this town. They were heading for the Elbe River, which was a point where the army had decided that that's as far as they were going to go, and the Russians were going to stop on the other side. So they went through this town without even stopping, and we all looked like, I don't know what, we hadn't shaved in 4 months. I was wearing a Belgian army overcoat, and I weighed maybe 100 pounds or less. And that was
How much weight did you lose?
Must have been about 30, 40 pounds at least. 30, 40. And Yeah, we were yelling at the Army tanks. And, you know, in English it was obvious who we were. And it was April 12th. And one of the tankers just stopped, and he said he just came over the radio that Roosevelt had died, and he handed me a big cake. And I took it, but I couldn't eat. I was too sick. But it was. I always say that the most, if you ask most people what's the most significant days of their lives, they'll talk about their wedding or their first child. And to me, December 16th was the one day, and April 12th was the other day. Everything else is secondary to those days. But the feeling at that point of seeing American tanks just rolling through, and even this one tanker who stopped to give me a cake, which I could it was a day, I'll never forget it. It was probably the most, the happiest day in my life, the most significant day.
Okay, when were you finally given medical attention and so on?
Well, that's another story. I hope I'm not taking up too much
No,
time.
no. This is why we're here.
April 12th, I was liberated. There were 30 of us. And we all had to decide what happens next. We're all alone. We're not part of the German army anymore. We're not part of the American army. We're standing here by ourselves. Before we had too much time to think about it, one of the Russian prisoners of war, who had been also liberated that day, he was working at a farm, told us that there was a German army unit that was sitting right outside the town. When the Americans came through, they just went out. And now, and I said, well, now the army is gone, they're at the Elbe River, we thought they'd all come back. But the Russians, I have the greatest respect for them. They gathered up a unit of their own and got weapons from wherever they got them, and they went out after these Germans. They were camped outside right out. But fortunately, all the Germans wanted to do was surrender. So the Russians brought them back into the town, and the Germans were perfectly happy to surrender to me and the rest of us. We had no weapons, no nothing, and here they're all coming with guns, and the unit that was ready to surrender. So we put them in a building and left them there. They had no interest in fighting anymore. They wanted to surrender.
Did you eventually, were you placed in a hospital?
Well, as I started to say before, we had to decide what to do. I knew that I had come in Europe at Le Havre, and I was going back to Le Havre. So I hitchhiked on anything I could find, and ultimately I got to an airfield in Hanover, and there I met a pilot who was going back to France somewhere, and I convinced him to take 6 of us back with him. He was carrying a crate of something, it was a small plane. He was carrying a crate of something, and he said, yeah, he voluntarily said, look, you use 6 of us, you 6 fellows, if you want, you can sit on the crate. And I'll take you back as far as I'm going. And I must have gotten pretty close to the Hof. I don't know where he landed, but he landed somewhere, and I found an army unit, and I went up to the first sergeant, and I said, you know, I was a prisoner of war, and I'm going back to La Harpe. Where can I sleep? What can I get to eat? The food's no problem. Go to the kitchen, get what you want. I said, well, as far as sleeping, you have a cot somewhere? So there's a cot down there in that tent. Go sleep in that tent. Next morning I got up and said, gee, that's a very comfortable cot. Isn't it? They said, that's the captain's cot. And he's out with his girlfriend somewhere. You know, I was there. He said, why go away? You can, why shouldn't you enjoy it? And so, you know, go back and get breakfast and stay as long as you want, but go leave with me. I said, no, I'm going back. I'm heading west. Well, I managed to get to some place called Camp Lucky Strike. I don't remember why. I guess whatever I hitchhiked on, it was going there, so that's where I went. And when I got there, they took one look at me and said, you better check the sick hall. So they put me in bed. And once they put me in bed, I think the next time I got out was 6 months. I had hepatitis, I had malnutrition, I had pneumonitis, I had frozen feet, I had a temperature of 103, and a few other, I had otitis media, and I had all kinds of problems. And once I had the comfort of a bed and somebody would take care of me, you know, just I couldn't get up again. So they kept me there for a short while, and then they sent me to the First General Hospital in Paris. I think it used to be the American hospital in Paris. Very nice place, very nice place. I could spend, if they only took me, I'd spend my life there. They had great treatment and great care. And after a short time, I think it was June, sometime in June, you know, the Army being what the Army is, they do things their own way. At one point they said, there's an ambulance downstairs, we're going to put you in the ambulance and we're going to take you someplace. So again, you don't question, take me someplace. So they took me to an airfield, which was fine. And the plane that was warming up on the airfield, they said, if you want, you can get on that plane and go back to the United States. If you don't want, we'll take you back to the hospital. Fine. Put me on the airplane. And as far as air travel is concerned, that was the best flight I'll ever have, and I'm sure it'll never happen again. They carry you in on a stretcher, they hook you up to the side of the plane, and you know, you don't sit down, you're lying down, they have nurses running up and down, you know, whatever you need, and it's not like today, it's non-stop. We stopped first, I think, in the Azores and then in Newfoundland, and each time they stopped, they fed me all over again, and finally we landed someplace around New York, because I ended up in Halloran Hospital, which is in Staten Island. So that was my Army career.
So you were discharged shortly after?
No, I was in the hospital in June until November. Mm-hmm. I think hepatitis was the reason they kept me that long.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Yes. I completed my education. I went back to City College, and it wasn't the GI Bill. There was another one called Public Law 16, which is even better than the GI Bill, because it paid for books and other incidentals And even further than that, when I got my first job, this Public Law 16 had a program called, I think, Journeyman's Wage, so that I got the differential between my salary and my would be earning 3 years later, which made a big difference in the accounting field because they, since you needed 3 years to take the exam to become a certified public accountant, they had a coolie system that they paid very little for 3 years. So it wasn't until you finish your 3 years of experience that you got a reasonable wage. And this Public Law 16, which was similar to the GI Bill, paid the differential. So that,
Did you ever use that 52-20 club?
Yes, yes, yes. The first time I didn't work in the summer, or go to school in the summer, was because of the 52-20 club. I could afford to take the summer off and, get...
Did you join any veterans organizations ever?
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm just retired as the treasurer of the Hudson Valley chapter of the American Prisoner of War group. I pay dues to all the others, but I don't attend any meetings.
Was there anyone that you served with that you maintained a friendship with or correspondence with after the war?
No, no. I'm sorry I didn't, but I think that's fairly typical. We all were so anxious to get back into civilian life that we just let the rest go. And I know in my unit, I was always aware of the fact that most of the people, practically all of them, were not from the New York area, New York City, or even New York State. It originally, I think, was a Pennsylvania organization before AST came in, and even the ones that came in from ASTP were not New Yorkers.
How do you think your time in the service and the things that you experienced changed or had an effect on your life?
I think it had a big effect in my life because I always tended to be an introvert, quiet, which I basically still am, but I feel a little differently about it now. I know now that I can walk into any room, any group of people, and feel comfortable. And it's a stupid little thing. I know my wife doesn't really understand it, or maybe she does. The little Purple Heart pin. If I have that on me, I think to me that's like an admission ticket to go any place.
Now you received the Purple Heart.
Yes. Yeah.
No, what was that for?
I think that it was probably for frozen feet, although I don't know. I received it in the mail after I was already discharged from the Army. And my understanding of it is that it's whoever put me in for it was medical personnel.
Did it change your life in any other way that you want to mention, or you think you...
Well, there were some medical problems that I have, I think, are service connected. I think the Veterans Administration is fairly generous in their evaluation of veterans. because when I go there for any treatment, I get understanding from them for some of the things that I think affect my life.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.
You're very welcome.
We'll send you a copy sometime within the next week and a half or 2 weeks. We're pretty busy this week with doing interviews out of the building. Would you prefer a VHS or a DVD copy?
DVD.
And we're clear.